the Puritan stock that found in New England were radically different than the Scotch Irish that settled Appalachia, which, that Appalachian style chant is a form of taking that, the type of, folk music that they have, and elevating it. And they were radically different from the Tidewater stock that settled Virginia. Like the Tidewater stock that Robert E. Lee came out of, they were extremely aristocratic. I'm just saying, like, you will find, I know, like today, like you have the DEI crowd who really hates on the old Southern elite, but I can tell you, like, just, you go south of the Rio Grande, like in terms of American historical figures that get the most respect, you're going to see Stonewall Jackson, you're going to see Robert E. Lee. The fact is, I mean, even, and not just because of their own political views, because I know, like, Robert E. Lee was hugely against, like, he was hugely against America expanding its empire into Latin America. But Robert E. Lee is not just respected for that, but the fact that, he was an aristocrat, and much of the Latin America was settled by second sons, third sons of aristocrats. So there is that that's aristocratic mentality that developed in the South, and and also that came from the Tidewater folk, and you have this pioneering I'll call it like pioneering like backwoods types who became their own form of backwoods aristocracy. Jack Hinson would be, just as a, if you want to look at one character in American history who defines the backcountry aristocracy that arose out of the Scotch Irish, Jack Hinson's One Man's War is an excellent read. I know Father John Whiteford has recommended it. I strongly recommend it.
I haven't read that. I'll have to check that one out. Say that again so I can pull that up.
Jack Hinson's One Man War. And later, just email me how much it will cost for me to sponsor you to do a stream on that book. I know you,
okay.
you want to do a stream on it, and I'll help cover the cost of that.
By Tom McKinney?
Yes.
Got it.
He is one of the greatest. Jack Hinson was also one of the greatest snipers in the history of mankind. He was easily surpassed by the White Death in Finland, but he's the greatest sniper, American sniper for sure, and definitely the greatest Anglo-Saxon sniper of all time.
Wow. All right. Well, I got it. I'm going to get that copy. I'll buy it today. Father Joseph, thank you so much for hopping on. Again, the topic, as you see, is what is the unique identity of American Orthodoxy? We've already been hitting a few points, but feel free to share your opinion on anything that you want to shed light on.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I would like to point out is that when we're talking about what American Orthodoxy is, we also have to look at the experience of American Orthodox over the past 200 to 300 years. It's one I mentioned it in the chat, is that we're coming out of what would be known as kind of an assimilationist period, which you really see culminating in the probably in the 1950s and 60s onward. But before that, if you look at the experience of even Orthodox priests that were occurring in the turn of the 20th century, and even slightly before that, they were treated very negatively. There was a kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for? There was a kind of like a suspicion of papism on the part of in many cases, a largely Protestant populace. So this is where you see a lot of the things like, for example, if you look at old pictures, black and white pictures where priests don't have, they don't have beards, they're kind of wearing suits, etc. All the churches got pews. So the experience of Orthodoxy in America was, until very recently, a very assimilated experience. It was an attempt to make it look as like everyone else's
Great
stuff.
Point.
And so this is kind of like where, unfortunately, the flip side of this is there's kind of a social reductionism, especially among immigrant communities. You're trying to make your church look as American as possible, but you're trying to keep things like, the ethnic foods, etc. And what ends up happening is, in that, the culture gets assimilated out for a few kind of superficial markers, like, say, for example, ethnic foods, etc. It's no surprise that throughout, Orthodoxy in America, the most well-known feature is often the ethnic fair or the ethnic food sale, and that seems to be kind of like a relic of that period. But as new converts come into Orthodoxy, they're not even sure what to make of that, because that's where you hear people. For example, I myself am lucky. I haven't experienced like the whole convert versus cradle debate that I've seen. I know it's real, but I haven't personally experienced it, simply because I'm used to everybody focused on the faith. But that I'm an outlier. I'm aware of that.
Right.
And so,
Now, I wanted to highlight Ortho Eric threw in $5. Thank you so much, Ortho Eric. Again, if anybody wants to support the stream or send in comments or questions, he says a big part of American identity is the revolutionary spirit, which I would absolutely agree with. And I think, and maybe this is a great talking point for the panel bringing up, because I think what we're seeing at the southern border is actually indicative of the revolutionary spirit of these militias, the National Guard going against the Supreme Court order due to Governor Abbott. But at the same time, I think it makes it difficult for Americans to submit to the hierarchy, as we mentioned in the opening. Again, the kissing of the priest hand, thinking that somehow this is a worship of the priest or a man, and everybody said, "Well, he's fallible. You know, I'm a man. I'm not going to submit to another man." Fair enough, but that's not what we believe. And understanding an authentic authority and the hierarchy, I think, is difficult for Americans. But what does the panel think about the revolutionary spirit, how it can be both a good thing and a curse at the same time?
Yeah, I would definitely agree, especially like coming out of the military. That's one thing that it's like, yeah, you have a good leader, you want to submit to them. And at least that's been my experience when you have someone leading you, doing the right things, taking care of you, being stern but fair. Then you want to serve them to the best of your abilities. But then when on the opposite hand, when you get a bad leader as well, it's like you don't want to listen to them. And you know, I've done it myself where I'll do things just well enough to where it's not questionable, but bad enough to where it's just like they'll give it to somebody else, because it's like, look, you know what? And that was a point in my life. But now it's like, okay, even if I'm under a bad leader, I would still do the best of my ability just for my own sake. But yeah, it's a both and. I would say it's a blessing and a curse, because yeah, the one, if you see a bad order, then you're like, I'm not going to listen to that. And a lot of that happened within the military, even when the jabbies and the coof,
Right.
those who knew and had good leaders were like, hey, you do what you think is right and stand up for yourself. And I was like, okay. And that's what I told my guys. I'm like, look, I'm not going to do it, so I'm not going to ask y'all to do it. And if it comes to my career, so be it. And the same thing, I have buddies that are actually down at the border right now, and I'm praying for them, because I can't imagine how hard it must be to get an order to stand and defend the country for what we know is right. And I do feel for these poor immigrants, being one, especially being like Mexican. It's like I feel for, because that's how I came across. I'll admit it. Like that's how my family came across, looking for prosperity and for better things. And you know, I tell people now, like, yeah, maybe it wasn't the best thing, but through God's providence, things turned out okay. But
Right.
yeah, they should definitely do what is right, even if it means like disobeying a leader. But yeah, they're in a tough spot. It's definitely a both and of a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, that willing to disobey, I think, is the blessing side of the American revolutionary spirit. But it also has garnered a lot of individualism and an inability to find authentic authority. And when you're talking about the military, I mean, that was a purging of honorable men that stood up for their values, which is part of the weaponization. And again, everybody, feel free to go wherever you guys want to go after this. But I saw yesterday that the Navy has just done away with their GED and high school diploma requirements. And many people believe this is because the 20-some plus illegal immigrants here in the United States, that they're going to want them to become part of the U.S. military, and that be their pathway to citizenship. And that's a bit of a scary thought as well, because you look at history of empires and bringing in foreign soldiers because they have no allegiance to the domestic population to police that domestic population seems like that's a real possibility in the near future. But what are your guys' thoughts on that?
The ruling class have done it before. The American Civil War. So people talk about like when Lincoln
Yep.
decided to wage war in the South. So he raised his 100,000 man army. 70,000 of them were Germans who were literally taken right off the ships.
Yep.
So it's like a lot of the American side on the Union side were Germans and Irish who were forced into it.
Yeah, but Gangs of New York highlights that, right? When they get off the ship, they sign up for the Union right away. They're given muskets, and they don't even know where Tennessee is.
Yep. Many didn't even know who they were fighting for. There were the ones who did. That gets into the whole history of Marxism and the Republican Party, and the fact that Lincoln was a pen pal with Karl Marx. But that would deserve its own distinct thing on an aspect of American history that's not covered. But the thing that shocked me, that got me into that, was when I was reading about, because I was my dad would take us to like all the Civil War battlefields, etc., for camping every single summer. So I was reading into some of the other like generals, like just trying to learn more about the different lives of different generals. And there was one I was reading, and I found out, oh, he was a vet of the 1848 Marxist Revolution in Europe. And then I found out, like, actually, there's a bunch of generals in the Union Army who are all veterans, who are all card-carrying Marxists who are veterans of the 1848 revolutions. And it puts the Union in a very, very distinct light from what I was being taught in, public school.
Yep.
And also the founding of the Republican Party. The idea that the Republican Party is a right-wing institution. You start digging into it and you realize, oh, so that's why Abraham Lincoln is at the Third International. Like you have that giant image of or icon of Abraham Lincoln, and why Abraham Lincoln has fasci underneath on his throne that he sits on the Lincoln Memorial, which also a lot of the modern day communists try to hide. But there's a reason why, communism also is tied, they're both products of the Hegelian dialectic,
right?
Of Hegelianism.
Exactly.
So it's like all these, and then you get deeper into it and you're like, oh, wait a minute, the libertarians were part of the First International. And that completely changes your view of what is libertarianism. And anyway, don't want to derail too much, but it's been done before and they're trying to do that again.
Well, I have two small points. One is that, like it was mentioned, the fasci are the meaning of e pluribus unum, which is like out of many one. That's like the Hegelian dialectic way of joining disparate things into one thing. It's kind of a pagan way of seeing the world. Like it's the same as the worship of Marduk that Jordan Peterson likes to evoke constantly. It's also like the Egyptian mysteries and Horus joining Osiris's dismembered body parts together. And it's also let's say the idea of Greek mythology of Prometheus giving rationality to man in order that man subdues the world. But my second point would be that it's not inherently, I would say, wrong to hire, let's say, foreign fighting men, because let's say Constantine did the same. Like the Varangian Guard was a let's say a body of Nordic fighters who replaced the Praetorian Guard, because the Praetorian Guard was quite corrupt and wanted to overthrow or at least pressure the emperors or plan coups if they didn't get their way. So the Varangian Guard was a way to, let's say, mitigate that corrupt part of the system.
Well, that occurred in the that occurred like in the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries. So that was a lot later than St. Constantine. But hired mercenaries were certainly part of it. But also when you look at the fall of the Roman Empire, the mercenaries of the Goths, they spread them all around the Roman Empire, and that's what allowed them to eventually take over Rome itself. I'm going to do a stream on mass migration in the Roman Empire. So, and I agree, mercenaries are part of warfare. So I'm not against the utilization of mercenaries. I just think tying in the Civil War with what's happening now, I think that there's some interesting correlations, as Jose was making.
Well, I hate to be the guy who says the unpopular things here, so I'm going to preface
Feel
this.
free.
I'm going to preface this with the fact that both of my parents were immigrants. They were legal immigrants from Latin America.
Okay.
Saying that what my parents went through and what is happening now are completely and totally different things. I do want to get into the issue of, the question of the revolutionary spirit being part of America. And in that sense, it kind of brings to mind the prophecy of Elder Ignati of Harbin, who said, what began in Russia will end in America.
Yep.
In that sense, the revolutionary spirit that we find occurring in Russia is one of a much more, well, I don't know if it's more of an evil nature, but it certainly had a more evil intent in the destruction of the monarchy
Explicitly
there.
from the beginning, yeah.
Right. Whereas I think that while it could be the same evil that is present in Americans, we've kind of lived with it our entire existence as Americans. So in that sense, this revolutionary spirit, if it's trying to spread to America and the West, is going to encounter people who are naturally much more revolutionary than the people in Russia ever were. So I think that's what we're seeing playing out right now in Texas, is that there is a natural tendency of Americans to rebel against that which they consider to be unjust, even if it is our own central government.
Right.
Now the question, of course, and I brought up my own background before, is because people coming through the borders, etc. I, to some degree, am sympathetic, but then to another degree, I'm like, why are you? If you know that this is happening, and I'm talking about people coming up and trying to cross the border. If you know that this is not popular, and you know that there are literally, this is destabilizing the country. Most countries in Latin America have a solid border themselves.
Right.
But so to me, it strikes me as incredibly hypocritical. We know that a lot of left-wing NGOs are pushing it.
Exactly.
A lot of these people have no idea what's going on. They're working through trafficking networks, sometimes being locked into slavery. The idea that letting people in through the border like that, and no offense to the disgruntled guy, I know you mentioned that was, I'm not judging you, but the point is that the amount of evil it's taking to move people here for the supposed greater good is staggering, and the amount of damage it's causing to the cohesiveness of the country is staggering. And so in that sense, I'm kind of like, I understand why what's happening in Texas is happening. But to me, it seems like it's just a natural outgrowth. It's not even, at this point, it's not even a revolutionary spirit. These people are literally scared that their country is being demolished from within. So that has to be taken into account.
If I could just comment, yeah, you know what? I wholeheartedly agree. There's more evil coming from that, and yeah, so I don't disagree with you at all, Father. So there's no offense taken, and yeah, there's a lot of it, and I see and grew up with a lot of that, seeing the mass coming across the border, and then what California turned into because of certain laws like that of, hey, you come here, and doesn't matter which way you do it, you become a citizen or whatever in that route. But the amount of death and child trafficking that comes across through San Isidro and through the different other borders as well, it's astounding, and a lot of people don't see that, and they're just like, oh, well, they're escaping and coming here for something. But it's the context of it, of why, like you said, there are NGOs. How is it that all of a sudden all these hundreds of thousands of people all of a sudden have all this money to move and be at one specific focal point? Yeah, there's definitely a lot more going on that sometimes people don't like to look at. So I do agree with what you were saying, Father.
Yeah, and I was going to make another point in regards to the revolutionary spirit, that I think that's partly why we look at the progressive left. They're filled with that same revolutionary spirit as the people heading down to the southern border. And they view themselves as, and that's where this narrative with Trump and MAGA, they view themselves as rebelling against an illegitimate authority, although I would say theirs is much more fictionalized. But the problems and the degeneracy in our country, I think, is also tied to that revolutionary spirit to some degree.
I mean, I don't want to. Not that I'm disagreeing, but my point is, I tend to think when we're talking about left wing, kind of the revolutionary spirit, that I want to say I believe that it's kind of really part of that. That it's just a disagreement between two sets of Americans, both with the revolutionary spirit. But a lot of the stuff that I see people from the left saying, like when we look at the COVID period, etc., how many of them were wishing death upon the unvaccinated? It doesn't feel the same. It feels like there's something deeper and more twisted going on there that kind of, I would say, would even make a Soviet blush. But I can't really put my finger on it. Maybe it is the same spirit, but to me it looks different. It feels different. There's something wrong.
Yeah, there's certainly different characteristics about it, no doubt. Ziz Legacy throws in $10 and says, in America, there is already a big Orthodox community and great Orthodox saints, certainly good saints. Yet there isn't an American Orthodox church. Well, there is an attempt. That's what the OCA is, the Orthodox Church of America. How would you explain that, despite so many great saints and great monk, American Orthodoxy remain under foreign jurisdiction? Well, the OCA...
Yeah, that's me. That's me. That's my comment. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Welcome, Ziz. Yeah, so I would say that, foreign jurisdiction. The OCA is an American jurisdiction. It was tied with ROCOR, but they're no longer tied at the hip like they used to be. So there is an attempt, but as we see that the OCA jurisdiction is a little bit more subversive than some of the other jurisdictions, which makes us quite leery. So that's where it's almost a blessing and a curse. And that's part of the American Orthodox experience. And I would say part of its identity right now is that we don't have a national church. But as some priests, and even I've heard, I believe Father Josiah Trenum mentioned that it's something that needs to be resolved. But at the same time, there's a sort of providential blessing in it, as we saw after the coup and some of the parameters that were taken. So feel free to respond to that. Appreciate the $10 super chat.
Yeah, okay. So I am from France, and in France there are also some Orthodox community, but so we are in the same boat of there are like multiple ethnic churches, the Serb, the Russian, and what in France the congregation of bishops says to us French convert to Orthodoxy is that, yeah, but you know, Orthodoxy is quite novel in France. We don't have many saints. We don't have a big monastic community. Whereas when I look up to Americas, I see that really great saints like Seraphim of Seraphim Rose, Seraphim of Platina, and or even John of Shanghai and San Francisco. So you have that set of Orthodox saints. You have Orthodox monastic communities, but it's as Josiah Trenum said in his Father Josiah Trenum said in his video, it is not sufficient to build an Orthodox jurisdiction. So what I am asking is, what does it take? We already have saints, we already have monastic community. Why does Orthodoxy do not come up with a new jurisdiction? Like at the time of the apostle, when the Church of Gaul was established, the Church of Spain, the Church of Italy was established, all inside one communion. Does it really have to wait like 100 of years of Orthodoxy to have one real Orthodox church, or do they have like? What is the reason that, for example, the Serbian Orthodox Church or the Russian Orthodox Church give you that they don't unite together inside one big Orthodox American church? Sorry for my English. I am not English speaker, and I tend to formulate it like with my words. So sometimes it can be tricky. But how does they respond? Like what does it take to finally have one final American Orthodox church like we all desire?
Well, I'll let the panel also share their opinions, but that would take, in a way, a synod by the hierarchs to sort of come to a conclusion on that issue. So that's part of the problem is the various jurisdictions haven't come to the conclusion that would be ultimately beneficial for them and the country. And so it's just been a contentious issue. I don't know how it's going to be resolved. God willing, it will be resolved. I think more and more Orthodox converts is a potential for it to be resolved, but also speaking about it and bringing voice to the hierarchy, I think will help it. But in a way, the people can only do so much. It really, to resolve that problem is going to have to come from the top level. But if anybody else want to share their opinion on that topic?
I get 2 points on that. One is it's not necessary for there to be a what do you call autocephalous jurisdiction within the United States for things to be valid. Like, I mean, just take Russia. The Russian church was going for like 5 centuries before they achieved autocephaly. So, and the Russian church is now like the largest individual body. So there's actually, I think, a blessing in terms of having what's the word I'm looking for? More intense interaction with those who've had the faith for longer, so that it's kind of like you compare human children to chimpanzees. Chimpanzee children are like full grown after very quickly, but human children take 18 years. It's there's a, for lack of a better term, an incubation period for the faith growing in among a people who never had it before, and there is benefits to. I think there is a benefit to having that level of for lack of a better term, incubation from another people who've had the faith longer, who've lived it longer, who can impart it to you. So that'll be the first point. The second, in terms of when it comes to like reuniting, solving the jurisdictional mess, like if you're looking at the origins of it, like Saint Tikhon was trying to set up a patriarchate within the Americas, and then you had issue, which I have no doubt Father Joseph would talk about, of Masons getting into Constantinople, and they were like, you know what, no, we want the American money coming our way, and so they established GoArch, which just ruins the whole process of trying to establish one body in the like ruling body within the United States. So what is it going to take to undo that damage that came from that? I mean, yes, it's the issue of the hierarchs trying to sort it out, but there's a step before that, which is that requires repentance at the bottom level, repentance among the laity, and there's a level of humility that's needed, because you're going to have people with, some people using, Rokor practice versus Antiochian practice versus Greek practice, all within the same jurisdiction, and there's going to be requiring a lot of humility is going to be needed to undo what was done, 100-something years ago.
Oh, okay. So you said that during the time of Patriarch Tikhon, there were already a plan to establish an American church, autocephalous church. Because what I want to sorry, you were talking about a revolutionary spirits, and I thought, no, I am not American, sorry, so this debate is not really concerning me, but I thought that America wants their independence, and they want to be free from the outsiders for the foreign influence. And so how would you make up that you are America, you love freedom, you love being free from an independence, and you said, yeah, we must to submit to the other jurisdiction, like Russian, like Serbian jurisdiction, like even like when there were like when it was like the communist times, you were submitting to a country that was communist, whereas you wanted to be independent. Having one American church that is governed by American people, for the American people, and for the love of God and their union with Christ would be so much simpler. Why having to divide around Serbia, Russia, and you see the point that and it was you said to me that it was a plan originally, but Constantinople tried to make their things their way, and okay, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, there's a lot that you have to unpack when you are talking about the history of Orthodoxy in America.
Yeah.
If you just move, let's say we move to like 1860. In 1860, there were only the Russians on the West Coast and scattered Greek parishes on the East Coast. We don't see anything else. And they were in communion and peaceful towards each other because there weren't that many of them. By the time you hit 1930, a whole bunch of things have happened. In the first place, as was mentioned, you had Meletius Metaxakis, who not only helped institute the new calendar, but also moved the Greek archdiocese under the control of Constantinople. You have the Russians attempting, and this is pre-revolutionary, attempting to create the first American body, which was actually what was known as the Theocacna, which came out after Bishop St. Raphael Hauini, who people don't realize even though he was Arab, he was under the Russians. And so they tried to create a kind of a Russian jurisdiction, but then there were parties in Antioch who wanted that American money. And that's what caused that kind of split to create that. There was actually a split between Antiochians up until 1970. There were two different bodies, one that was Russian and one that was just purely Antiochian. And then of course everyone else is going to move in. Like if you're coming in from Serbia, why are you going to give your money to Greece, Russia, or Antioch? Just give it to the Patriarch of Serbia. So what ends up happening is that we move into a period where we are today, where everybody gets the benefit of money. And unfortunately, that problem is that nobody's going to let that go. And that's why SCOBA originally, that the whole idea, because the canonical practice is one bishop in one city. But if you've ever been to New York City or Los Angeles, you know that's not true. There are 8 bishops in one city, and because New York's where the money is. So unfortunately, you're going to have to deal with that as a reality. And ultimately, I don't know that they're going to do it on their own, but what needs to happen is, frankly, it's very simple. We need a lot more Orthodox Christians and that's going to change the mentality of the people in charge.
Okay, thank you for both of you. Thank you, Father. Thank you. And to the other host, I don't know really your name, but thank you for all of you for your response. So that makes more clear to me, like, and I see some comparison with the situation in France. But I let you go for other subject relative to America. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, brother, for hopping on, and thanks for your support. Really appreciate that. Ian, what's going on, brother? Welcome. You're muted, man. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. It shows that you're muted.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think he will be back. It says device is not connected. So anything that was said you guys want to build upon? We had a super chat come in by L Dad, throws in $5 and says, we would be negligent to not discuss the radical or the racial diversity in America. The online Orthodox can be extremely hostile to people of different races. Well, certainly, I think that's part of the uniqueness of the American context is we aren't shared by a ethnic connection anymore. And so, people have heard a lot of bad stories about Russian and Greek parishes, particularly being ethnocentric. But I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on that in regards to?
I think he may be referring to, and I'm just going to say it flatly, he may be referring to Black people. There is a lot of movement in Orthodoxy in America to reach out to African American communities. However, when we talk about, online Orthodox, I mean, I know what kind of people he's talking about on Twitter. They see a Black guy and a white girlfriend, and they're both Orthodox, or wife, etc., husband and wife. They'll just pop out of nowhere and just be like, "This is against God," and that's not. But people are afraid to say anything about it. I mean, I have, and I think a lot of it's kind of stupid because when we're eventually, when we're talking about Orthodoxy, we deal with a lot of distinct ethnicities, whereas in America, that kind of experience has been reduced to some sort of form of colorism, and so it's a very different and confused experience when the two mesh. And this is something that I realize what he's saying is, I mean, I think it's wrong to say the online Orthodox. I am online. You guys are online. I don't think anyone here is, saying going to go for crazy offensive stuff, but I know what he's referring to. Okay. It's just unfortunate that,
It's also an element of when we enter into Orthodoxy, we bring our own hot mess with us. Part of it is frankly uniquely English baggage that comes with it. Because when you compare the English settlement of the New World, versus the Spanish or even the French, the Quebecois, you have the Métis even in Canada. Like the fact is, like Spain had this massive old Spain. Because I want to clarify that what calls itself Spain today is the child of old Spain, which is a very different entity.
Well, how old are we talking?
So 500 years ago, they had a huge council within the Spanish Synod debating over the Native Americans, were they human? Were they descendants of Adam and Eve? And the conclusion they had in the end was yes. And so they're like, okay, we have to convert and we have to absorb via intermarriage, and that's what
Okay, so you're still referring to Roman Catholic Spain. I thought you might have been referring to Orthodox Spain in the 9th century or something. Okay, so when they created the casta system, etc.
Yeah. So it's because even advantage, a lot of my ancestry was done by my grandmother, and it's we got a lot of native, you got even a few Africans who pop up here and there, and it's what do you call it? And unfortunately, that is a baggage that some people are very wedded to in America in particular, and I understand part of it where it's a defense mechanism because you have. What I'll say, an unnatural pushing for what do you call it? Interethnic marriage is being pushed in the media in a way that's far outstrips what it actually is in real life.
True.
And also the thing is, I know the divorce rates for interracial marriage in the United States are horrific, but personally, the reason why I think that is, if you compare that versus the Spanish experience, it's because in the Spanish experience, they were marrying underneath one faith and they were being united in one faith. Like even the name Texas. So Texas, Tejas, it's actually not a Spanish word. It's a Caddo word. The Caddo were one of the large tribes that lived here, and they actually approached the Spanish explorers who were coming here, and they converted en masse. And Tejas is usually, or Texas is usually translated as meaning like friendship, but it means more than that. It actually means two races becoming one. Like that's what the name actually, its origin in Caddo, that's what it means, becoming one in one faith. And that's so the thing is, you see the same thing in Russia. The Russians themselves were a product of mestizaje. Granted, not the extreme form of like.
Well, yeah,
Native
but
American
I've got to interrupt here because
Sure,
one thing we have to establish is that what you're referring to in terms of Spanish culture is not generally the American experience. I know exactly what you're referring to because I have family members of a variety of different colors with a variety of different ethnic backgrounds. They're all considered Peruvian, or they're all considered Argentinian, or they're all considered Puerto Rican. This is not how most of America understands the concept of race. And so one can argue whether the mestizaje system or the casta system is superior or not, but we can't kind of enforce that and assume that that's how the majority of Americans think. Because I can tell you, wherever you go, that's not how it's thought of. When we think of race, we generally think of people of certain ethnic backgrounds, groupings, and colors. I mean, but so it's a little bit. I don't want to kind of misrepresent what people feel for the sake of the system that I grew up in, etc. Because it doesn't necessarily apply. My experience is not your experience, is not David's experience, is not Ivan's or etc. experience. We have to kind of approach it realistically. Is my point.
Correct. If I may interject for a second,
go ahead.
I think that the issue of race in America has shifted in the last century because America received a lot of immigrants from other countries like Italy or Ireland, who were mistreated on ethnic grounds. So it's not that it was something like whites versus blacks. That's something new that had the added baggage of slavery and such. But I think that kind of racism took the spotlight from the previous kind of racism that I think is rooted in the Enlightenment philosophy that led to imperialism and the British, let's say, colonial mindset. Because if you look at, for example, the development of Darwinism and such, it's tightly linked with ideas of racial supremacy. So I'd say that those were the ideological, let's say, ferments that led to political justifications to subjugate the world. So in a sense, I'd say that kind of racism, or the racism against black people or against white people, is very recent. It only has like a couple of centuries. And most empires throughout the world, of course, they did have kinds of racism, but they were multi-ethnic. So it wasn't tenable to let's say, create a system where basically your empire will rule over people who are considered inferior in terms of genetics or ethnic or of ethnicity.
Ian, can you hear me, brother?
Yeah, I had to download the app. Hopefully it's working now.
Yeah, it's working a lot better. Now we can hear you good.
God
So what's
bless you
up,
guys.
man? Hey, congratulations on the baby.
Thank you. Yes, it's been
Many years.
Thank you, Father. I've taken a long break, as you've probably noticed, David.
Yep.
Sometimes it's what we need. So thank God.
Absolutely. So you got any thoughts on where we're at in the conversation or the topic at hand?
Not in this specific part of the conversation, but I'm not sure if I'm digressing here. This might be kind of a question for you, Father, but for everybody, obviously. From a clerical standpoint, I'm a convert, first generation American. I have, my wife is converted. My son has converted with us. And then my son from my previous relationship, I should add that. But me and my wife recently had a baby, and he will be cradle Orthodox. And I know you've kind of touched on the whole cradle versus convert thing. What I'm wondering is, when I came to the church, I didn't know there was Greek or Russian or Serbian. I just kind of found it through David and through some other friends, and I went to a Greek parish. Didn't know there was other options. I've enjoyed myself there. I know there's some issues with that in general. We don't have to go into that too much. But my question would be for people that are, inquiring into Orthodoxy, how do we keep the American ideologies of the times separate from the heart of true Orthodoxy? If that makes any sense, because true Orthodoxy is the royal path. It's neither right nor left.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say that the Orthodoxy has always risen above ideology, and so we have to keep that in mind. That if a person is following, go ahead.
I think he just has his mic on, Father. There we go.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was brought on the panel until now. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just going to say that Orthodoxy elevates above ideology. The simple reality is that if we look at all the services and prayers of the church, one can be occupied throughout the entire day with work and prayer, and there would be nothing else. And ultimately, that is, I would say that's the ideal. That's the monastic ideal in any case. And those problems take care of themselves. We had somebody, the guy, Ziz Legacy, pointed out that America had many great saints, but in the case of St. John of Shanghai, he passed through France as well. So in that sense, this world is never our home, no matter what country you're in. And that's something that we have to remember. This is only a glimpse of the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think people get caught up sometimes, especially when coming to the church and church hopping, if you will, to find a Greek or a Russian, and they say, well, the Russian's more, has different views that are more aligned with my political views. And I think sometimes that's not the best way to find a church, if that makes sense. Because my church, there's been times during the whole, where there was things we did that I didn't agree with, but it's still my church. And I think it's up to us as lay people to also, push back against what maybe our parish priest is doing or the patriarchs.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're not going to escape this question if you're talking about like true Orthodoxy versus the official. You're not escaping the COVID question either, because there was that debate and that difference of how people handled things. While my synod and a couple of others very strictly, were against it, that doesn't mean that everyone was. But more importantly, the question ultimately, it's going to be the question you're going to have to ask wherever you are, is does it rise to the level of heresy? I tended to see COVID as a global Sergianism test, where basically how willing would people be to submit to whatever the state says, regardless of whether it's good or bad? Unfortunately, heretical or not, a lot of people failed, some people passed, and a lot of people are still learning. So people learn from it. But I'm not going to go one way or another with that question because I didn't have to. I just simply said no to everything. But I find it, I'm very loath to condemn other people who, for whatever reason, decided to go another way. Granted, people did make mistakes. And the simple reality is the question of how willing we are to forgive that is, I think, of paramount importance. But if it is something that you do feel that it was something to the level of the moral, the ethical, and even the spiritual, in terms of it being evil or immoral, then you have to do what you have to do. There's not really, that's true wherever you are. Yeah.
I've also found that as I came to Orthodoxy, I started to realize the America that I thought I believed in isn't the America of when you become Orthodox. It's completely, like you said, it trumps all ideologies. So you have to, I got lost in that, still trying to be right-wing or a libertarian while being Orthodox. And eventually they just don't work together. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I noticed that Death Culture made a comment about the Yankee Empire versus the South, etc. I hate to be that guy, but I tend to think a lot of that is LARPing. What I mean by that is that there's very few things that I would say are genuinely Yankee. And while many people in the South do have their own culture, it comes to, I'll put it this way. Where I live in Pennsylvania, and I see a bunch of Confederate flags. And no, I don't believe they all came from Kentucky. And no, I don't believe they all have a rich heritage from down south. They put up the flag because they want to say, I don't like black people. That's what it comes down to. And that's fine. You do what you want. But the point I'm trying to make is that those people are LARPing. It's pretending to be something that you're not. So that's why when I'm seeing, like, especially with this whole thing happening in Texas, people are like, oh, we're getting to the new Civil War. There's literally thousands and thousands of people trying to overrun the borders. This has nothing to do with North and South. This has to do with whether we're an actual country.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who fly the Confederate flag.
The Confederate flag, that it is somehow anti-black, is because of the programming and lack of research on your end of what was going on during the Civil War and the region of the South and its culture, even before its time.
I'm not talking about the flag or the South. I saw the flag in the South. I brought it up, but you're not listening, because in the South, there are people, before the recent BLM thing, there were black people who had the Confederate flag because they were Southerners. It's not a racial thing. Now, if you're in Yankee Town like I am, then it is a racial thing because you're no longer dealing with actual Southern people.
The Confederate flag should stand for pride, not prejudice. And
exactly.
Pride is not a good thing either when it comes to other things. But I was born in Texas, so I could fly a Confederate flag because I'm proud of my Southern heritage.
Right.
But I'm in an interracial relationship. You know, I'm not flying it because I'm like, you know, rolling coal out of my diesel truck and just to LARP to make it look like I'm something I'm not.
Right. Exactly. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's lost. It's in that sense, it's kind of lost its meaning as originally what it was, which was a symbol of national heritage. But I think that it's it's taken on meanings that it shouldn't outside of where it came from. I mean, they look at what they're doing. Anyone who says that it's like a North versus South thing didn't notice that it was only yesterday that Thomas Jefferson's statue was removed in New York. Like, that's terrifying. These are, and that, so it's not like it's a Southern thing, like, oh, we just need to they took down Thomas Jefferson in New York City. The point, this is no longer a North, South, racial. This is literally what the communists did, which is to destroy all elements of our previous history.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's the word.
To delete history, whether or not it was good or bad.
Well, if I may comment on that, I'm since I'm a journalist, I'm trying to meet people from different political sides, and right now I'm meeting a lot of people from the, let's say I live in Spain, so I'm meeting a lot of people from the pro Hispanidad side, which they kind of idealize the Spanish Empire a lot, but their idea is sort of taking aside the political aspects, the cultural aspects they pine for are let's say more or less Catholic. They and you could say it's a LARP because they're so very few and they're so disconnected in terms of let's say centuries from that time period that it's impossible for them to truly have a connection. But I would dispute that in the sense that we have to be careful not of accusing other people of not let's say having true roots, because a lot of them, they're from Catholic families, and they're trying to be very devout Catholics. Me as an Orthodox, I couldn't care less about the Spanish Empire in its Catholic incarnation. I can see a lot of problems with it, and it's very difficult let's say to enter into the political debate about those kinds of things and the historiography that you have to do and the justifications, because for example Spain right now is dealing with a lot of, let's say, what they call leyenda negra, which means black legend, which is an attempt to paint the Spanish Empire as completely evil and completely destructive force, in the same way that the Anglosphere is dealing with wokeness and those things that are also affecting us. So let's not be naive and pretend that Orthodoxy, even in Russia, is somehow pure and pristine and without those problems, because Perhaps maybe wokeness is not such a big deal in Russia, but Russia was communist until a few decades ago. So it's not that modernity hasn't impacted us. And furthermore, it might be a LARP, it might not be, but what we're talking about seems to be merely, let's say, pure cultural hegemony, because now Orthodoxy is trying to define itself within being a very small minority within a context of, let's say, open Satanism. And I don't think that since it's in the New World, Spain at least has the let's say history to say, well, in the 8th century we were Orthodox or something along those lines. But America doesn't have that, and it will always have to define itself against the backdrop of let's say a Protestant or a deist or a Freemasonic or whatever kind of nation. And if we're trying to figure out what's the, let's say, the cultural identity of Orthodoxy in America, we have to think about the Orthodox people who live in America, not about, let's say, the unorthodox who live in America.
Well, that seems unfair. How come you can give Spain the benefit of the doubt with Orthodoxy when they've been Roman Catholic for 1,000 years, but you can't do that with Americans? I live, where I live, there's a large Mennonite and Amish community that they are definitely with the Anabaptist tradition very separated from Orthodoxy. Their influence on the cultural tradition of the country is unmistakable, and that's true. I hate to say this, but with a lot of different groups, whether even Protestants, national Protestants, like say for example Lutherans from Sweden, etc., and a number of countries retain a lot of traditions which we find in Western Orthodoxy or Western Rite Orthodoxy that were pre-schism usages. And so I don't know that I would be so quick to say, well, because Americans had nothing, they didn't know anything. I think that's unfair. I've been to post-Soviet Russia. I lived there for almost 2 years. I can agree with your critiques, but I think it's unfair to say that Americans basically are worthless because of the fact that they never had any connection to Orthodoxy.
I wasn't saying that at all. What I'm saying is, if it's a matter of, let's say, trying to be conceptually clear, in the sense, if we're asking what's the ethos of American Orthodoxy, then it has to be Orthodox. It cannot be Protestant, it cannot be Catholic, it cannot be something else. And if we're talking about the ethos that seeps into, let's say, Orthodoxy, that can be, let's say, transfigured, that's something else completely. So we're trying to be, let's say, more nuanced in the way we approach those things. And I picked the example of Spain because, to me, I don't think there's such a big, let's say, a Orthodox remainder, because I think Catholicism stamped it out. And I would say that even though the history of Spain is very, let's say, mixed, because Spain converted, let's say, at first through Arianism. So it became Arian first in like the 3rd century or so. And then after a lot of political pressure, it became Orthodox. But then the differences between Orthodoxy and Catholicism were very difficult to parse out. It wasn't such a clear cut, because the papacy didn't, let's say, establish itself as such, as a political entity, until late in the 8th and 9th centuries. There wasn't such a big difference between Catholics and Orthodox, except culturally speaking and in terms of theology. It was one big church. It wasn't that Catholicism developed from the 1st century in the West. So it's very difficult to have these conversations.
I don't want to be too critical here, but one thing I should point out is that the conversion of Spain to Orthodoxy was a largely spiritual thing. There were Spanish martyrs, Saint Hermegild, who was martyred by his own father, which led to the conversion of Spain to Orthodoxy. As to when they became Roman Catholic, that's easily traceable at the Synod of Burgos in 1080. We can trace virtually every historical kind of move towards the creation of Roman Catholicism, including the centralized papacy, to Hildebrand of Savannah in 1075. So, I mean, I don't want to muddle the waters and be like, we didn't know what was Orthodox and we did. You can find clear at the Synod of Burgos, the ritual of Spain was literally destroyed, replaced with the Roman Rite. Married priests were removed, monastics were moved into the priesthood. It's not like this isn't something you can actually pinpoint.
No, I don't dispute that. What I say is basically that before the schism actually happened between Orthodox and Catholics, the theological developments had already taken place centuries before. So,
Right.
and the Frankish influence in scholasticism was centuries prior to. So the schism didn't appear out of thin air, and it didn't just happen 1 year because like there happened to be a dispute, and we figured out that the other person was believing something different. Like those developments in theology that happened in the West had been brewing for centuries. So if I were to say, it's not my place to say this, but if I were to say this person is Orthodox, this person is not, it would have to be on the basis of their own belief, not the communion in which they were participating in.
Right, but my point is this, and I don't want to belabor the point because this is really going off topic as to what we're talking about in terms of American Orthodoxy.
Yeah,
but I would recommend, if you ever visit my channel, look for Who Invented the Roman Catholic Church. You can actually point out that a lot of these theological controversies that lasted for a couple of centuries, it's mythical. In reality, there was an actual split within Rome with rival popes where eventually one party killed the other, and that party was the party that became Roman Catholicism and had all the marks in it with the Dictatus Papae.
Well, I want to keep the conversation going, but we got to catch up on some super chats on Streamlabs. And Frankie D, shout out to our brother Frankie D, throws in $5, says, I think American Orthodoxy is still in its infancy. I definitely agree with that. It is still a very small portion of the population, correct? From my understanding, it's almost 1%. And Jonathan Paggio once talked about how America, being at the edge of the world, is a kind of chaotic place, and that manifests in many different ways. Well, great point. And I think I brought this up before, even through secular scholars talking about the frontier of the American context and how the West Coast was sort of the end of the frontier. And you see how Silicon Valley and technology, again, they reach the Pacific, and then that frontiersmanship sort of reverberates back across the world through technology in certain ways. That's been postulated, but great point, Frankie D. GBTWC throws in $5, says, as Orthodox, why do we define ethnicity by our borders? Doesn't the jurisdiction of the Western OCA bishop include Canada, Alaska, and Mexico? Well, I don't think it's defined by ethnicity. As we've already highlighted, that's a dubious category when you talk about Americans as a single ethnicity. And that's just the structure of the OCA church and how they have incorporated Canada, Alaska, and Mexico. But again, that, as we've already brought up, GBTWC, that would be something for the hierarchs to eventually sort out in regards to jurisdictions and how exactly America would fall under a single national jurisdiction. Because if it was the American Orthodox Church, a true one, well, then the bishop wouldn't be over Canada or Mexico. God willing, they would be able to eventually get their own. But thank you very much for that. John Anon throws another $5 in and says, what do you think about the version of St. Innocent where he emphasized the importance of English language, and how can that be implemented in America's many ethnic jurisdictions? I think we can postulate this question and go around if you guys are interested. I think it's good, as we've talked about, that Orthodoxy goes into cultures and sanctifies it. And so it uses the local languages of the people, and having liturgical services in English, I think, is a positive benefit. That's one of the things I love about the Antiochian church, is that all my churches I go to are in English, and that helps me certainly be a part of it. But what do you guys want to, the question is, what's the importance of English language, and how can that be implemented in America's many ethnic jurisdictions?
David, I'm gonna just real quick say that I got to go to a baptisms, but I wanted to just hop on and see you guys. Our first set of godchildren are being baptized today, so I'm gonna go get ready for that.
Well, tell your wife I said hi, and God bless you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, and then I guess real quick before I go, I just wanted to say that things being in the English language is great, because if you've ever been to St. Anthony's in
everything's
Arizona,
in Greek.
Oh, it's beautiful, but especially as a catechumen, when you're supposed to depart, and then you're sitting in there after catechumens are supposed to depart, and the monks are kind of just staring at you, because they just have this feeling. They're like, you're new, and we said to leave, So I just thought that was a funny experience from my own personal life, where they kind of just stare at you and you're like, I have no idea what's going on here. So sorry.
Absolutely.
But yeah, God bless you guys. Great conversation. I'll continue listening as I get ready.
All right, take it easy, man.
Father bless. Thank you.
I was going to point out that what Father Joseph mentioned about money, in terms of how do you get a parish that's very ethnic to use more English? The answer is also money, at least from what I've seen in my own experience. I'm just saying, like, if you have people who are showing up to church and are giving, and they're English speakers, I'll say if it makes if the budget suddenly is increasing and it makes the priest's life easier, he's going to start shifting to more English. So, not saying that should be the reason, but I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
I was just going to say that, frankly, I'm always shocked that people who don't want English in America exist. I mean, I understand that, first off, the majority of people who do, in my opinion, keep the older liturgical languages is because they don't speak that much English. But when there are people who often come in and they'll be like, well, I don't see why we have to use English, even though they speak perfect English. That to me is insane, and it kind of relates to those Latin Mass Catholics types. It's like, okay, you have some affection to hear an original, not understanding that language, like humanity, moves on and the church adapts with new languages, etc. Saint Innocent was famous for doing a number of translations from Slavonic into various native languages. There's nothing wrong with that, and I don't understand why people have an issue with it.
Yeah, I think Orthodoxy being the vernacular of the people is part of the history of the church. I can understand if you have an incredibly ethnic Russian group and they still practice Church Slavonic. Okay. If we did eventually have a American Orthodox Church, then I would want it all to be in English, because that's the vernacular of the people in this country. And again, it gives us more of an Orthodox identity. So thank you, John and An, for that super chat. Next one came in from Ziz Legacy, throws in another $10, and he's back and joined the stream. He says, okay, big spicy question. Should the Orthodox American endorse the 4th of July rebellion against monarchy? If you don't want to speak about this because it's too problematic, no problem. Enjoy the super chat, the little French guy. Well, we talked about this before, and Father Josiah Trenum has done videos addressing the 4th of July regarding this, because it's popular discussion amongst Orthodox circles. And if I remember correctly, his point was that it is still worthy of celebration in regards to the construction of the American identity and what this country represents. We can also, as Orthodox, be more lenient towards monarchy being divinely inspired. But of course, as he highlights too, America is never going back to a monarchy, at least not in any time soon. So if you guys want to bat that one around, the 4th of July, I think to be Orthodox is to be patriotic. And I had another priest come on and we talked about patriotism and how that is a sort of veneration of our ancestors, our forefathers. And, my family was here before the revolution, and certainly they were all Protestant, but it forms my identity as an American, that entire thing, however I feel about monarchy being Orthodox as an Orthodox. But what are you guys' thoughts on that?
You find that your real fathers, honestly, because patriotism, patria, it's loyalty to one's father. And as you mentioned before, those who are called founding fathers, they were not the founding fathers of the United States, the same way that those are called, libertadores in Colombia and Mexico. They were not liberators. The real founding fathers of the United States, those were at Plymouth Rock, those are at Jamestown, Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the men who actually, plowed the soil, built families, had family life, built, granted various Protestant churches and a few Catholic in Maryland. And, those are the real men who should be celebrated. So like if you're Puritans back, July 4th, those are celebrate the men who you're actually descended from.
Right.
Not necessarily Thomas Jefferson. You can recognize the role that he played in the formation and history of the United States, same way that I would recognize the role of Bolivar, even though he was a dictator, in the formation of Colombia, Venezuela, etc. But it's that's the thing. Like real patriotism, it's and this is something I know for me in my journey into Orthodoxy, is the discovery of like, wait a minute, who are the actual people who built the nation that I came out of, or the people that I came out of. And it's about honoring them, even in their, errors that they had. and not falling for, I'll say, public school narratives of, oh, these are the people who built the nation, when they weren't.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that the Libertadores and the founding fathers were all Freemasons,
Agreed.
but that's not what the stock of the country was.
Right.
The people, and I get what you're saying there. One thing that I always bring up, because people ask, well, what tradition from Orthodoxy do Westerners in America have? I always bring up fish fries. And this sounds like a kind of a strange thing, but when you think about it, that is actually, if you look even in the early colonial period, people did fish on Fridays. And that's really kind of where the fish and chips took off. Fish and chips is a fasting dish. This is something to keep in mind, that there is a rich history there that can be drawn off of, that we don't have to abandon everything about our culture. And I mean, granted, depending on where you are, there may be more or less of that than you realize. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of the whole pretend you're not an American or pretend you're not from here. To me, it's counterproductive. Christ wants to save us where we are, not to transport us to a physical place, but to a place that's beyond where we are.
Right. And just to summate what everybody was speaking, I mean, I see 4th of July as more what Jose was saying, as sort of a veneration of the men that came before, wherever you want to put that pinpoint in that historical lineage. And so no matter what I feel about monarchy as an Orthodox Christian, I mean, I still want to give some type of honor to all the men who have come before to found the country, and both good and bad. And I think that's part of patriotism, as I said, is to not be one of these naive patriots that doesn't see anything wrong or can't criticize the nation as a whole, or aspects like Masonic founding of some of the forefathers, stuff like that. I think true patriotism is being able to call a spade and also still appreciate the good that came with it.
I agree completely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I totally relate to everything you said, and especially your take into patriotism. Patriotism is part of Orthodoxy, and by honoring your fathers and your ancestors, you're honoring the original of all life, which is God. And I really relate to that. So thank you for your comment.
Well, thanks for the support, brother. Really appreciate it. Good question. Frankie D throws in another super chat, and he says this one for $10. Thank you so much, Frankie D, for the support today. He says, I'm going to finish the work of my relative Franco and make Spain into an Orthodox country while I restore the monarchy. And all serious, it's a laughy face. I have grown a lot being in the church. Much of the worldly problems fade as I engage in my own spiritual struggle. Yeah, that's a great point. And that's something we brought about with masculinity, and again, a lot of the Orthodox men and converts realizing many of the problems we're facing is to take on that spiritual responsibility as an Orthodox Christian and focus more and more what's in your control. That gives you agency in your life, because what's going to happen to the US dollar or the border or the next election cycle, we can't control that. And over obsessing about it, I think, is detrimental to your own spiritual health. Focusing more and more on what's in your control and your prayer life and what you're doing and how you're treating people, and if you're making the services on time, that's what we can focus on. That's what we can do. So I agree totally with Frankie D. As the more I've engaged in the church, the more worldly problems fade as a priority. Not that I don't recognize them or see what's going to potentially unfold in the future. And then last one, and I think we're going to be up to speed on super chats. Frankie D throws in another $5, and he says, character limit, but I want to be more clear, as I have learned that the problems are with me in my own room. I have concerned myself less with political matters and more with trying to face my sins and become a man. Can't change the world, but can change myself. Absolutely, Frankie D. I didn't even read your second super chat, but that's exactly my point as well. And I think that only makes us Orthodox American men become more masculine as we address our responsibilities, especially our spiritual ones. We mature. And I think so much of sometimes online Orthodoxy, of which I'm a part of, there's a overemphasis on things that are outside of our control, which is a form of, I would say, immaturity to some degree. Not that we don't talk about those things. Absolutely, we should address anything that's not consistent. But I agree with that. Thank you, Frankie D. Anything that was said you guys want to build upon?
Yeah,
I actually have to go. I gotta go.
Okay. See ya.
All right.
God bless.
Take care.
Thanks for joining.
Take care.
No problem.
Thank
God
you,
bless.
Brother Joseph.
God bless.
I wanted to build upon what was being said about, let's say, the founding of America and whether it's good to celebrate or not. My spiritual father likes to celebrate the birth of Argentina. So there's obviously a clear Orthodox, let's say, blessing of that. But I would say that if we want to think about things like history or geopolitics or culture, we have to take a longer view. And America is clearly the daughter of England, let's say, so the spawn of England. So and the cultural roots are there. So if you want to like create or think about let's say an Orthodox past or even a